This is not what I thought it would be. Hello, my name is Allison Muse. I am a social worker currently residing in Jibuktuk in Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, or Halifax, Nova Scotia. All of the photos you will see in this presentation were taken by myself on this beautiful land. I graduated with my Bachelor of Arts from St. Mary's University in 2020, shortly thereafter starting my BSW at St. Thomas University, from which I graduated in January 2022. After graduating, I immediately began working at the Department of Community Services in Child Protection, which is where I had completed my BSW practicum. However, in mid-2023, I found myself needing a change and pivoted to working in the field of addictions. Since then, I have worked in an outpatient withdrawal management setting, and more recently, I was hired full-time at an opioid recovery program. I've absolutely loved this work, and I felt like I really found my place working in that area of healthcare. But I realized quickly that I wanted to be able to do more as a practitioner. Thus began my MSW journey at the University of Waterloo. As I started thinking about what I was going to do for my creative piece, I engaged in a lot of reflection about who I was when I began this program and how I was challenged and ultimately changed through participating in my practicum, coursework, and overall learning. Something that I thought a lot about was the certainty I felt at the start of this program. I was so certain I knew what I wanted to do, where I wanted to go, and how I was going to get there. I had built up experience working in the addictions field, and I felt comfortable and competent there, and had the desire to expand my learning and credentials so that I could go further in the field and serve my community. However, I was confronted very quickly by the fact that this mindset would need to be dismantled if I was going to gain anything from my experiences. This first occurred when I was informed that placements in either of my preferred fields, addictions or hospice and palliative care, were next to non-existent in my city. Despite great effort on my part, I was continually turned down by every agency I inquired at. I had come to terms with the fact that not only was I not going to get to have a placement in my preferred field, I was going to have to take a placement in a field I was wholly inexperienced in. This was confirmed when I finally secured a placement at a sexual health center in my city, offering gender-affirming care. I knew nothing about the processes behind gender-affirming care and did not have experience working within this community. I felt incredibly anxious as I knew this was a historically oppressed and underserved community, and I was keenly aware of the ways in which my positionality and lack of experience could result in me making mistakes. I quickly had to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. As I mentioned, I was fortunate to complete my practicum at the Halifax Sexual Health Center, a non-profit health clinic offering services like reproductive care, STBBI testing, and gender-affirming care. My role focused primarily on supporting gender-affirming care, so meeting with clients for resource navigation, single-session counseling, gender-affirming hormone therapy intakes, and writing surgical readiness letters. There was a lot of education involved in ensuring I was competent in my role. So I engaged with webinars through the Community-Based Research Center and became familiar with the WPATH Standards of Care version 8, as well as the clinic's intake and consent processes. I would also like to note that working on an interdisciplinary team can be challenging, especially as a student, but I was grateful to be treated as an equal collaborator by the doctors and nurses who came to me for support just as much as I did with them, which was incredible for growing both my competence and confidence. I also learned to challenge systemic gaps through direct advocacy, like writing letters to MSI for gender-affirming care coverage, and by building trust with clients who had experienced harm in the healthcare system. These experiences strengthened my understanding of client-centered, anti-oppressive practice, and really helped to shape an ethical framework for my practice that is grounded in autonomy and confidentiality. My experience of getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, with opening myself up to being vulnerable, with embracing learning and growing through discomfort and challenge are the key themes within my piece. I realized that the neat boxes I had put myself, my practice, and my understandings inside of were a direct influence of the institutions in which I had been working, and I would need to break out of them in order for any true learning to take place. I also reflected a lot upon transformative learning theory here, in the sense that I do not see myself as the same social worker that I was when I entered this program. My assumptions, my ethics, my perspectives, the lens through which I view things have all evolved as a result of critical reflection and experiential learning. I also reflected upon anti-oppressive theory and practice here because it formulated such a large piece of my practicum. I had to practice solidarity and allyship with marginalized communities, a process that involved acknowledging my positionality, learning through discomfort, and accepting that I will make mistakes, and that this is a crucial and inevitable part of the learning process. I also really had to grow my professional capacity and identity in expanding what I knew about social work. I had to look at what empathy, humility, and honesty meant to me, and how I had incorporated them into my practice in the past. I think I had shied away from new experiences in practice due to a fear of doing things wrong and ultimately underserving clients and communities. However, working on my humility made me realize that to expect myself to never make mistakes was ultimately a hindrance to my practice. That empathy and honesty are key in creating an environment where mistakes are fertile soil for doing better and growing. In examining my social location in an entirely new way and grappling with how social structures and healthcare systems impact marginalized communities well beyond what I had ever anticipated, I had to figure out what my role looked like in redressing those impacts. I was able to do this in real time, advocating for clients to receive healthcare in a system that sees their healthcare as elective or cosmetic rather than life-saving. It looked like engaging in a lot of self-reflection and interrogation so that when I showed up, I was showing up as my best self for the people I worked with. It looked like asking questions about everything, even if I'd already asked a million, even if it was uncomfortable. I saw that as I was learning and overcoming my barriers, a huge part of being a social worker is taking that learning and passing it on, to use my ability to overcome barriers so that others might empower themselves to do the same. So when I was in the creation process for my piece, I engaged in a lot of reflection about my experiences, and I wanted to express this personal and professional journey on the canvas. I thought about my certainty at the start of my journey. I was so certain I knew what I wanted to do, where I wanted to go, and how I was going to get there. Very rigid, not unlike the tight, neat little boxes that Western neoliberal ideals place us in. So my piece really reflects that journey of rigidity into openness, from certainty to curiosity, from perceived competence to authentic presence. It's like a visual timeline and a self-portrait all together. I see my vulnerability being represented by the cracks in the surface, literally the feeling of being exposed. I see my growth as being represented by the greenery, something pushing up against rigidity and growing out of it. The tight, clean lines are the challenge, to resist what makes sense and what is comfortable. I wanted to tell a story with the color as well, moving from grayscale, cool tones for rigidity to rich, warm, vibrant colors for change and evolution, from cold control to warmth and openness. The fragments of words peeking out are excerpts from coursework, from readings on theory that have influenced me. They're somewhat obscured because they were the foundation for my learning and because not all learning is visible at the surface. And finally, the overall piece, the way that it is in transition, going from constrained by familiar to new and confusing but ultimately freeing, is about my experience of becoming comfortable with discomfort. Ultimately, I feel that the greatest lesson I learned in this journey is what it actually means to grow and learn. I think that when you work in health, you are so often working in these institutions that are rooted in Western ideals, in colonialism, in oppression, in one particular unquestionable way of thinking. And I think it can be so easy to subconsciously align yourself with that kind of thinking after a while. The way of thinking that is so certain and rigid, the kind that shies away from discomfort and the scariness that is acknowledging when you don't know something, the kind that allows these institutions and power structures to remain where they are because no one ever thinks to question them, and the ones who do are silenced. So for me, recognizing that true growth and learning can only come from discomfort was a huge turning point. And so I think social work for me is about continually stepping back and looking at the neat boxes we have arranged for ourselves and asking how we can distort them to allow for growth. So what now? That is an excellent question. I feel that I have a few different paths stretching out in front of me right now. I do see the opportunity to continue in the field of mental health and addictions as a promising one. I think I have a lot to offer in this field, and I remain very passionate about it. That being said, if the opportunity to join the team at the Sexual Health Center ever came up, I think I would jump at the chance to be a part of that team again and do that work, because I genuinely thoroughly loved my experience there. I think that ultimately I feel a lot more equipped to enter into new fields that are outside of my comfort zones because of my experiences during my MSW. I would also love to work in palliative or hospice care, as I took that as an elective in my final semester and I have really enjoyed it. I think that regardless of where I end up, I know that I will bring with me the flexibility to grow and change in light of new information and new situations, the humility to accept that I can and will make mistakes and that it's a necessary part of the learning process, and the confidence in myself as a social worker to rise to the occasion and to embody the structural, anti-oppressive, anti-colonial, and social justice values that I had the opportunity to make flourish during my MSW journey. This is not what I thought it would be. It was so much better.